Welcome to another Founder Wisdom podcast with Sam Himelstein, PhD. He's co-founder and CEO at Family Spring and Center for Adolescent Studies. Sam's a cool guy. We're going to talk about mindfulness, authenticity, mental health, substance abuse, and everything in between today. This pod is presented to you by podpire.com. If you want to start your own podcast, scale it, monetize it the unconventional way, you can go to podpire.com. Sam, welcome to the pod. Tell me a bit more about yourself and Family Spring.
Yeah, for sure. It's an honor to be here. I really appreciate you taking the time. Yeah, I co-founded Family Spring with a buddy of mine. It's a direct therapy service agency where we have a number of therapists who work for us in the practice, and they serve adults with anxiety, depression, trauma, substance use, and we also work with youth as well. We work with incarcerated youth, and we have our own kind of mindfulness-based substance abuse and anger management intervention. And I co-founded the operation with a buddy of mine from grad school. We were both trained as psychologists, and we still have a lot of passion for the clinical work, but we just found over time that we were really entrepreneurs at heart. So we've just been taking a lot of time to learn how to build the business, and it's been a creative and amazing process.
Very cool. It's quite rare that psychotherapists or clinicians in the mental space start their own business. What inspired you really to do that? Were you always that way, or did you see that you needed to operate outside of the current box in the system?
Yeah, it was a little bit of both. I think I've always had the entrepreneurial bug. If I like reflect back on my life, I've always kind of been that way. I wasn't quite aware of it until, recent years. But the other piece of it is what you're talking about, the way that mental health is delivered, particularly in the United States and particularly here in California, where I'm at. I went through many jobs and positions of seeing what the limitations were. So I really just wanted to build something where we could provide really good, direct quality care to patients and also create an atmosphere for therapists, for employees that was sustainable. So that's why me and my partner got together and did this. But there has always been a side of me that's like, I need to be the one visioning for the future, building something. I feel like I get fed by doing that. So when I had supervisors and I was working for other people or big conglomerates or organizations, something always kind of just didn't feel right. So that was also a big piece of the push as well.
Let's start with incarceration. I feel that
hmm
too many folks in the US get incarcerated. Education is also not on point. The system, they expect you to fit in that box, and then we suppress rebellion or rebellious behaviors a lot. Well, I mean, I was one of these folks, quite rebellious and always swam outside of their currents. And I feel I was suppressed because of it. And if I didn't have the environment that I had, I'd probably be in jail right now. But fortunately, entrepreneurship found me and started multiple business, quite successful nowadays, but could be very much in between these walls. What's wrong with this current system? What are potential solutions that you'd have to the incarceration problem?
Yeah, I mean, you spoke to a lot of it, particularly here in the United States. We over incarcerate. We look towards punishment first. A lot of the root is just a lot of social economic problems. It's not just making a decision to, quote unquote, create a crime, but it's the conditions that people are in that cause them to think the way they do or to feel like they got to survive by doing things that are technically outside of the law. And so I was like that. I grew up in a two-parent household and they never gave up on me, so I was very, very lucky. And a lot of my black and brown friends didn't have that, and they didn't have the privilege of going through the system the way I went through it. But I was in and out of juvenile hall, and it was a lot of inner work and also a lot of outer support that was helpful for me. And I think, to answer your question, I mean, it's really an overhaul of the system, which is starting in some places. looking at the trauma that people go through and the trauma of poverty and all the social issues, and trying to kind of target those head on, to not see, especially young people, juveniles, to not see them as criminals, but people who have made mistakes and still have a chance, and there's still some hope with them. But the reality is it's an industry out here, particularly at the adult level, and people are profiting off of lots of people being incarcerated, and that is, one of the underbellies of capitalism. And I'm not anti-capitalism. I'm an entrepreneur, right? But there's certain ways that it can be misused, and having, prisons on the New York Stock Exchange is one of those ways. And so it's just a complete overhaul where we need all the stakeholders together: therapists, community leaders, health advocates, coming together with politicians, congressmen, all of the above, to say, hey, what are we doing here? Because it's not currently working. Deterrence theory doesn't work. Deterrence theory is basically like, if you do something bad, you'll get locked up, and that should deter you from doing more bad stuff in the future. That has been proven to not work. So we have to really look at it as an epidemic, to look at trauma and poverty as an epidemic, to start to think about it differently. So it's a loaded question, and there's a lot there, but it's a very, very worthwhile endeavor. And I'm super passionate about at least our lane in that, which is helping with the trauma, the therapy, helping people become self-aware, and so on and so forth.
I think, rich people, or, let's call it, white folks get traumatized by crime quite easily if someone robs them, and then they're like, yeah, keep these fuckers in jail.
Right,
I never want to deal with them again.
right,
Well, I mean, violence has been part of society. I'm not promoting it, but like, this world is, it's not pure comfort all the time, and people
right,
get angry and they have their reasons, right? Anyway, I'm not promoting crime in any shape or form, but I think they should learn to forget and forgive, that is, and
right.
should also learn that, yeah, someone doesn't only learn through punishment. I do believe in part punishment, and that's arguable, but I also believe in rewarding people from taking good behaviors, that is. Now, you spoke about anger management.
Mm.
Is that is that like a government thoughts program? Is it like really what people have out there, like anger problems? Isn't like the root cause, like you said, social, economic, their education, how they've been taught things, and just, I mean, that they're broke, that's why they steal? Or is anger a true problem?
I think it's a bit of a both and. In some sense, especially young men get labeled as angry, and so there is sometimes a mislabeling as, you have this problem, and if we address it at this cause, things will change. So on the one hand, I think what you're alluding to is right, where it's like there's just a lot of trauma, there's a lot of poverty, there's a lot of hurt and suffering, and that manifests in many ways. And to just label it as anger is a little bit of a fallacy. But then on the other hand, I think a lot of the youth that we work with, their reaction to their trauma, to their life, to all the things they've been through, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes could be authentic anger. And so for us, we just use the term anger management. Like, you're totally right. These are, we're contracted by government entities like the county probation departments to go in and do this work. And so they're actually the ones using that terminology, like, oh, Family Spring is an anger management program that comes in. And for us, it's usually just a way to get in. Once we get in, it's not like we're just talking about anger every second of our sessions. We're talking about everything: life, what's causing anger, maybe it's not anger for some people, it might be anxiety for other people, or trauma, substance use, whatever it is. So it's really just an inroad to talk about the self, and to talk about, who we want to be in this life. And we have these very real life conversations with young people who are incarcerated, just like we would with a middle-aged person who sought out therapy in our clinic and is motivated to be there. The questions come down to, who am I? Who do I want to be? How do I want to show up in this life? And, how do I want to negotiate this social world? So we have all of those very, very real conversations. It can look very different for different people who are incarcerated. They're not just one profile. They're just as diverse in terms of their personalities and their upbringings and things like that as any other population.
I have somewhat of a naive view of what a solution to that problem would look like, in my opinion, would be to have entrepreneurship in their lives very early so that they can
Yeah,
be in touch with money legally, right? And teach
right,
them that, I don't know, like selling a brick isn't as profitable as starting a business, scaling a business. It's so much more easier to start a biz and you make so much more money the right way, that is. And
right,
also sports, like all that primitive, especially when it comes to young men, that primitive testosterone is energy could be spent somewhere. So my kids, for example, like want to start my own school in a couple of years when they'll be of age to start learning. Should be three, in my opinion. They'll start their own ventures. They will do a bunch of physical activity so that at the end of the day, all that energy can be spent productively, and not like their dads, aka me, that was a class clown and getting fired of the classroom pretty much all the time, fired out of school. And yeah, just not meant to sit on a bench and listen to a teacher that
right.
didn't know better than myself. What do you think about entrepreneurship and athleticism to potentially solve these problems?
Yeah, I don't think that's naive at all. I think it's a good idea. I've thought of that deeply. I think there's a lot of young people that I work with in the system, in juvenile hall and in prison, and even just out in the community that would benefit from that. I think you're probably aware, like when I say our, I mean like in the US, like our school system is completely set up for the opposite of entrepreneurship. It's set up to learn how to be an employee, which there's no problem with, right? Like I have employees in my businesses. Being your own entrepreneur isn't for everyone, but there are many, many youth that I interact with in the juvenile hall who are natural entrepreneurs at heart, and they have not had the resources around them to facilitate that. So I highly believe in that. I'm actually in development of some programming for that. It's very rudimentary, but it's just getting the process started. And then to your other point about physical exercise, absolutely. I mean, that's as a psychologist, that's just something we've known for years that physical fitness, physical exercise, the body holds trauma, the body holds well-being, and being able to move that in a certain way is very, very, very beneficial, not only to our physical well-being, but also our mental and our spiritual well-being as well. So I applaud you for what you're doing. I'm thinking of very similar things with my kids. My kids are 11 and 9, and the first job for my oldest is going to be in working in my other business, which is much more content related. And just learning about what it takes to be an entrepreneur, and if that happens to be for them, by the time they get there as a young adult, they'll be way better equipped than a lot of their classmates who don't get that training. So I'm all about that. I love working with youth, and I believe in them, meaning like, of course the way we teach this to them is different than we would teach somebody who's like getting an MBA or something like that, but it's still doable and it's still extremely meaningful.
So I worked for my dad that was an entrepreneur. It was really boring work. I think he had me do like data stuff, like doing lists, like
Mhm.
fetching people names and emails and so forth. I was paid, I think, a bit more than my other jobs, and it was like extra cash. So that was my motivation. But I mean, if my dad would also have paid me to start my own biz, or I don't know, would have popped some Facebook ads for me and would have taught me that this guy just bought my product or my services, might say that I'm good at art or whatever. Maybe I could have get the entrepreneurial spark quicker. I got my entrepreneurial spark buying stuff on AliExpress. I think it was like 17 for $1 and selling it back for 50, So again, very much of a money motivation.
Mhm.
And that was like my video game addicted brain, right? So we're always dopamine, dopamine, dopamine. So that's that's how entrepreneurship got me. What would be a better solution to get young folks to make money with entrepreneurship? Would the Facebook ad scenario that I described be somewhat accurate? Hook them to money and teach them that they can make money, and then they can go by their own because they make money like it's water.
Yeah, I mean, I think it could be for sure. I think it could absolutely be accurate. You know, I think depending on the life stage, right? Like your kids are younger. If we're talking about teenagers, let's say, for example, and this is the psychologist side of me, it's like the best case scenario is to have some way for that teenager to unearth or uncover what interests them. For some people, it could be more sales side stuff like you're talking about, right? That's how it was for me, by the way. When I was a kid, one of my earliest memories of entrepreneurship was buying at the grocery store like a six pack of juicy fruit gum, and each of them still had the 25 cents label on them, and it cost $1 for six of them. So I knew if I was gonna get that and sell each of them for a quarter, I would spend $1 and I'd make $1.50, you know? That was like my earliest memory of thinking in any entrepreneurial way. So like that could be helpful, particularly for young kids. I talk with teens, for example, a lot about social media and the opportunities there, because I'm often telling kids or teenagers, will log into their Instagram account and I'll say, do you think you could ever get a job with this stuff on your Instagram account? Because, these are kids incarcerated, they're in gangs, there's not a lot of positive stuff there. There's guns, there's drugs and stuff like that. And they'll always say, "Oh yeah, I don't think so, but it's going to be tough, whatever, blah 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 blah." And then I'll always say to them, like, "Do you know how people make money on Instagram?" And then we'll get in this conversation because they're on there like all day, right? So we'll get in this conversation about just how Instagram monetizes itself and monetizes creators. And so for some people, I could see that being like even just learning about that and being like, okay, my ability to post content daily or multiple times a day or whatever could potentially translate into a monetizing way. And that's still kind of like a trading my time for dollars type of thing, but there is some sense of being able to scale. And for some teens, it could be the spark that's like, okay, well, what could this turn into? I've certainly had those conversations. So I think it's just really meeting them where they're at and having kind of that psychological session of like, what is it that drives you, interests you, and matching that up with the potential particulars of the entrepreneurial path.
Yeah.
That's what I found most helpful in unearthing that with people.
Right, and using their ego to eventually make money. So what
Right,
does a young kid want? They want the likes, right? They
right,
want to be popular, then they want the women if they're
correct,
young. So okay, post pictures of yours that get a bunch of these, and then teach them that okay, now you can get sponsors, and that if you want to get women, you need money. You need to be by your own, and independent. Okay, sure. Then go outreach to that brand, go DM that brand on Insta and ask them for $100
right.
um, to feature them in your next post. So yeah, it could be a cool venture. It's interesting though two things. It seems that in business, for all entrepreneurs, they mostly start with ego. I mean, and with money, right? And all of that. And in my case, it was also almost like fake it until you make it. I used to repeat that a lot when I was young, and seems that this model served me when I started my career, and that's probably because the bar is so high to enter that market. Um, the school system, it just doesn't prepare you for any of that. And me being privileged, like my parents, they just paid for everything. My life, that Xbox, these video games. I mean, I had jobs at like 15 or 16, but I was always comfortable. And I think that's somewhat toxic when you go and try to slay the big black dragon,
Hmm.
which is the market. I mean, people have no pity for you there. It's like pure competition. So what do you suggest to actually have an easier time entering that market? Is it to have entrepreneurship taught at school? Should we even rely on the school system, or should we straight up start our own school and try to give these young folks a shot? Because I mean, if they don't have that in their life, they'll just go commit crime. That's how I was, that I got bored, and crime gave me adrenaline, and the reason, like escape or fuck with that guy. It was, yeah, very much thrilling. So, and if I start this own private school, um, I mean, I'm gonna charge a shitload for my student. My plan was 100K tuition, so
Right.
but that is discriminating in a sense. So what should I do here? Help me a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I think an overhaul of the education system, absolutely, 100%. Whether it's an overhaul and or starting new schools like you're talking about doing, for sure, because there's so many, you know this obviously, right? Your listeners probably know this too. There's just so many facets of entrepreneurship. So for example, like in Florida, they're trying to make it mandatory. They might have already done this. They're trying to make it mandatory to teach like finance classes in high school. That's great. That's a wonderful thing. That's also one aspect of entrepreneurship, right? We know that part of being at least a CEO, which is, what I am, and I'm continuing to get better at that over time. It's like, it's not just me having all the skills, it's putting the right people around me who have the skills, some of which are a lot smarter than me when it comes to things like finance and stuff like that. So I think having a school or having a class or all of the above where you're teaching the different facets of what it takes to, as an entrepreneur, starting out as a solopreneur, starting out kind of grinding yourself to building an actual company and everything in between, because different strokes for different folks. Some people are going to be amazing content creator kind of solopreneurs that are extremely successful and might just have a small team around them or nobody else. Other people may build big companies or be a part of big companies and run big teams. um, I think the school system is absolutely lacking in all of that. And the thing that's kind of sad about it is the entrepreneurial class or school or spirit. That's where we can make a lot of changes. Because like one thing I think about almost every day, we have a growing team here at Family Spring, about 20 therapists, and we'll probably be at 30 or 40 before the end of this year. And our goal is to get up to 100, and that will put us at a really good revenue and give good benefits and good compensation to our clinicians, all of that, right? So one of the things I think about every day is like, what can we do to make the employee experience better and sustainable so they're not just like another average person in America or in the world that's like, I hate my job, I just got to deal with this. I think asking those questions is and starting to teach people that early on in a school like the one you're talking about, that's going to make it so that kids start to think about that when they're a lot younger, so but that by the time they're our age, they have a lot better answers and more possible solutions. So yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I think it's good if you're interested in doing that. I think it's totally fine. I mean, as an entrepreneur, I think it's totally fine to charge for your school. And if you get to the point of success, that you're probably looking to get to, you're going to have the leverage to allow a scholarship in every once in a while if you choose to do that. And that's one way you can give back. And even beyond that, the people that come through that school are going to be hopefully impacting the world in a positive way, and that will trickle down to hopefully the whole world in many different communities. That's how I think about it, at least.
I
Um,
think I just like remove the 100K per year fee and take like 10% of their business and have strict objectives.
right,
And if they don't meet 100K per year to that their business would make, they would be on probation. Their parents would make 5% of that.
right,
And these things, they look like completely far-fetched, right? Like, oh,
right,
isn't like that child abuse? No, child abuse, in my opinion, is boxing someone in that system and having them completely crushed by the market if they try to be
right,
by their own.
right,
They can
right,
be recruited by a big ass company in a 9 to 5, but that's because the company has huge coffins. I don't think that will scale either in the age of AI. Anyway,
right,
that would be challenging. The school, by the way, it would be like their courses would be like 10 COs per day or 15. They would listen, they would ask questions, and they would go implement on their business. They would have a Stripe account, which would be owned by their parents because they can't under like 18 or something like that. And yeah, I feel that would be quite interesting. Now, what if they give up the school? That like legally, there's some questions as well. I think you need to be schooled in the US. You need to pass tests and so forth. I need to check that. But yeah, thanks for helping out on that brainstorm. Where can people find out more about you, Sam?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find out more about me on LinkedIn, just at Dr. Sam Himelstein. You can find out more about me on Instagram, and then our websites, of course, centerforadolescentstudies.com, myfamilyspring.com, and then my personal website is samhimelstein.com.